don't have,
Okay.
well, I'll reference the questioning matrix on top.
Okay.
All right. Well, Nancy, thanks for meeting with me again. I know that this planning time in the middle of the day is important, but I appreciate you doing that. Tell me about the lesson. I mean, no, there's some exciting things going on.
Well, I think it went pretty well. The kids seemed to really enjoy the Hunger Games themed lesson. It's really one of my most favorite lessons to teach, and I think they really were able to, by using the classification codes that I had implemented for this lesson, I think they were able to master exactly what I wanted them to master there. For the most part, they could come in, look at the verb, see what the criteria was that they needed to use the verb for, and then use that in the paragraphs that they wrote about their favorite character. It did get kind of pushed. I mean, it was just really packed, so it was rushed, and we had a hard time finishing up, and some kids had to finish for homework.
Right, and that's one reason I want to talk about it before, because students love to hear each other talk, and they love the Hunger Games and movies like that. So
exactly.
That was good, the way you kept the transition. Your model really kind of anchored it down, where you went through. If I was talking about PETA, I would, or Katniss, I would, and you went through the same modeling what they did, and then they had to choose a different character. Something that kind of helped anchor it in your model, where you kind of went through the whole thing. Well, I think Katniss does this, and built that in. So you got some student work here. Talk to me about why you chose these pieces of student work and what it helped you learn from that activity.
Well, the classification codes are kind of interesting, because I originally implemented it just for students, or thought of it just for students to be able to give feedback to each other. But really, as the students were working and I looked at the feedback they were giving each other on the first draft, I realized that it could tell me a lot about my lower levels and exactly where their thinking was kind of unraveling or coming apart. So the lower level example that I have, this student was able to determine which verb needed to be used, but then they might have gotten the classification code incorrect, and so that kind of told me a little bit about just their general language skills and their ability level, that ties back to them struggling in Spanish 1. So it's kind of neat.
So is that some of that transition piece? They may not have gotten it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But overall, I felt like by using the strategy, my lower levels were able to, it was a little more concrete for them to kind of hook into, and it kind of helped them to understand the material and to be able to use the correct verb.
So for them, it kind of made it concrete, like they could see what you were trying to teach them because it was labeled that way.
Exactly. So then my middle students, this is where I really saw the biggest growth, I guess, in my middle levels performing students. They really were able to look at this and apply it to the paragraph that their classmates had written, and really do a good job as far as identifying the verb and the justification for the verb usage in the paragraph. So that's where I saw the biggest shift of students, moving from medium to high. So.
Okay. So you actually had, you could look at it and see their development of their skill to move them into that next band. Okay, that's great.
Yes.
Let me ask you a question before you get to the high one. When you were looking at their groupings, did you find that students of similar performance were sitting or working together on this, or did you find that a high and a low were working together, or?
Well,
because they all seem to know what the process. So when I was talking to students around me, I could hardly tell who was high and low by the work they were, by the way they were doing the work.
The way I have my classroom organized is I have a high performer and a low performer sitting, so that they can kind of collaborate, and the higher level student can help the lower. But then when they exchange papers, they exchange with the person behind them So I had 2 highs working together and then 2 lows working together, or a medium
Okay,
and low.
okay. So you had the same, similar student performance providing feedback to each other, so you didn't have one writing more complex.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
I like the way you grouped that. I mean, that's, you didn't have to come up with a whole new grouping, but you used your seating area to have multiple ways of grouping students. I think that's
Exactly.
a real efficient way of doing that. Tell me about the high student. Look, that's a lot more writing.
It is. So for the high student, generally, like you said, they're going to be a lot more communicative and expressive in their writing.
Okay.
They're going to try higher level or more challenging sentence structures, and just more, they're going to elaborate a lot more. And so, and then the student giving the feedback really just kind of, like I said, took it and they ran with it. They just, it kind of reinforced the knowledge for the higher level student. And again, by them, really having to ask themselves, I guess, as they're going through this, what does this person mean? And trying to kind of figure out what their partner was saying in the paragraph, and then using this.
I really like that, because I mean, if you're thinking about the rubric, I mean, that's really bringing it up to a different level of the thinking piece of it, because they're not just thinking about creating, now they're thinking about analysis of someone else's work. So
Exactly.
that's a simple activity per se, but it really hits some places on the rubric with it. Did you have to provide any different supports for certain students? I mean, I know when we met last time, we were talking about Josh and Jason and Myra. Did you have to do anything particular with them to keep them up to speed?
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but I did spend probably a solid part of the lesson just kind of in that area of the room, kind of guiding them through, questioning them, asking them really specific level 1 questions. What are you going to try to say? What is that? Where does that fall on the classification code chart? And helping them understand the difference between description or a trait and emotion. So a lot of them just kind of struggle with, determining that. So kind of walking them through the thought process on how to even approach the code sheet.
So for them, it was more acquiring the skill, and the others you could push towards more analysis.
Exactly.
Okay. So it looks like it was successful based on your student work and your informal feedback. What do you think really made that lesson successful? It could have gotten derailed in a lot of places in there, but you really kept them focused and plugging along, even though it was took more time than you thought. What do you think really helped push them through?
Well, I think there were probably 2 things. Just the Hunger Games relevancy to their lives, I think, was really exciting for them. They just get jazzed up, when it's something that they are familiar with, and then using their content knowledge with something that they're familiar with just kind of motivates them. So I think that all the activities that dealt with the Hunger Games were motivating, and I think that I kind of tiered the activities and went from a more basic level to a more application type activity with the paragraph. Kind of guided them, and I didn't just turn them loose on a really challenging activity right off the bat. And I think the codes. So I think all those different activities really led to their grasp of the content and mastery of the objective.
Okay. And so looking at the rubric, which indicator do you felt like you kind of helped you anchor that together, just from your perspective?
I probably think activities and materials.
Okay.
Pretty strong.
I agree with that. I thought that the activity is what brought places for you to jump in with different students. You had a great model, which then carried through with their work, so that they at least the concretes had it. But you also used some vocabulary and structures in your model that would challenge the upper group because they wanted to live up to that expectation. And so, when I'm looking at the reinforcement that I was looking in this lesson, really, for us to kind of talk a minute about exploring activities that would enhance parts of the lessons. And those can help us generate different strategies, because, you really made an application. And if we look at on our rubric here, and if we look at the activities and material, you know, I really thought you were in this upper group of 4 in those activities because it was definitely challenging.
Mm-hmm.
You challenged them on different levels. It definitely held their attention because it was very contemporary with the movie you chose.
Right.
It wasn't the same kind of Spanish and French videos I saw in the 80s. And you know, then you had their reflection at the end where they used the Freyer square to kind of reflect on that. So I mean, I think you hit most of those in there, and that's what anchored it through. So you know, kind of thinking of different things that you've taught them since then, so you know how they retain the information. Do you think it carried forward to the next lesson with it?
I do. I think that, you know, I saw students pulling out the classification code sheet just with different activities that they've worked on since that lesson.
Okay.
And I really feel so strongly about this that I'm going to try to do something similar to this for, you know, some of the lessons coming up that I have in the next unit. So, yes.
Good. And I think that really would get to that thinking strategies as well, rather than just going through practice in their book. This is really helping them create and analyze. I really liked it. You know, I'd even like for you maybe to share that with some of the English teachers, especially English 1 and English 2, because that's one thing we're seeing is,
Sure.
as you know, English 1's preparing for EOC is them really being able to pick apart that grammar. And with our ACT prep, working with those students, we really see that most of the science questions are not as much about science as they are about reading charts and graphs and making meaning of the question. So I bet as we're going through some of those practices, helping them mark up ACT.
Sure.
Just as listening, you think, go through that. So I might send a couple people to talk to you if you don't mind
Okay,
sharing.
great. Yeah, I'd love to.
So, you know, you're going to keep teaching the same group. If you were to tweak this activity or tweak your lesson, what's something that you might do to kind of make it stronger or more successful?
I guess the lesson structure and pacing, I felt like needed to be tweaked.
Okay.
And I say that because, you know, we went through the, I guess, the introductory activating strategies, and it just kind of drug out a little bit longer than I thought it was going to,
Okay.
and time kind of got away from me. Ideally, I would have liked to have had them write the paragraph, peer edit, and then rewrite.
Okay.
You know, just to kind of get that feedback the same day and kind of, you know, learn from what they had done.
Right.
I felt like that would have been best. That was what I was shooting for. But, you know, it, like I said, time just got away, and, you know, like you asked me in the pre-conference, I had to kind of shift things and do the Freyer Square early.
Funny how that comes back around.
I know. You knew, didn't you?
Does that happen on Fridays?
Yes, yeah. And so, you know, I would say lesson structure and pacing was probably one of the more challenging areas for me.
Okay, so when you go in, you know, it's not, you know, really when you're looking at lesson structure and pacing, and I didn't choose that, and we'll talk through kind of what I thought might be in there, but on the lesson structure and pacing, you know, one of the pieces here, you know, you're looking at starting has a coherent beginning, middle, and end, pacing is brisk. Sometimes that pacing is brisk, it's that differentiation piece. It's not, you know, too brisk, you gotta kind of feel that. So I challenge you to not go overboard with trying to trim it and make it more concise.
Okay.
But, you know, really kind of feel that group out. And your feedback was something you had asked me to look at. And I think that's what kept everybody focused, that you had longer, more in depth from one group, so that your upper performers didn't just rush through it, put it down, so now they have downtime. They really worked through it because you were prompting them with that feedback, and then they love to hear each other talk.
Right.
They love to tell people what they think.
Absolutely.
And so that feedback kind of played into that stream.
Yes.
And interest of our students. You know, I was looking at questioning. And that's something that we've kind of talked about a little bit in our clusters, in our professional development, but, you know, kind of going through some of the script here. We'll get to that activity. I got a lot of notes here. You know, in your model, you went through it, and then when you got into your questions, so what did these questions ask? And it was more of a specific description. This is what they were looking for. You know, when you're looking at if you're changing the verb to a form of estar, think about how the meaning may change. Would it change? Yes or no? So you're asking a good prompt because you're trying to get that initial understanding to figure out where they were. But I wonder what would happen, especially with the group you're trying to challenge, if you thought about our question matrix and kind of went more towards the explain and the hows and the whys when they're asking one another. So how do you think that would look?
And now that you bring that up, I realize that I did spend a lot of time with my lower group, given, really just guiding questions to kind of get them through the process. But I did, I guess, kind of just let the upper group run, but didn't really ask them many questions. So I definitely feel like I could maybe use the question matrix and help them maybe ask each other more higher level questions, like how might changing the verb impact or change the meaning of the sentence, or could just staying in that lower quadrant, lower right quadrant.
Exactly, and so that's going to push that application piece as well for those students. When I was looking at it, in my notes, putting questions and things together for this conference, really looking at that questioning to help that faster student be able to process and not just label. They did a lot of writing, but then the processing was kind of labeling it, which was the purpose of your lesson. So I think your lesson was strong and upheld the goals that you had for them.
Mm-hmm.
But I wonder if tweaking that may have helped that group extend, kind of on your SLO, those top couple groups extend.
Exactly. I think that, you're right. I needed to kind of push them in a different direction and push them a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
And the question matrix would certainly help them do that.
Okay.
Sure.
And with your feedback looking through there, your feedback was, sometimes it's hard to get high questions and high feedback on the rubric. And so you kind of, as you're going through planning your lesson, and you had those prompt questions that you used.
Right.
Even as you providing the instruction, if you look at that matrix and create some of those higher level, that could become your feedback for them. The feedback doesn't have to be the answer. You
Correct.
could give feedback in questions.
That's true.
So that may be,
Hadn't thought about that.
that may be something that you want to look at, is just kind of have some of those questions in your back pocket.
Yes.
To pull out when you go to certain students, to kind of differentiate that way as well.
Right.
Is there anything about the lesson that I haven't talked about that you would like to kind of walk through?
I don't think so. You talked about the feedback, and I was really excited to hear what you said about that. I think
Okay.
that's it.
So here's, as always, here's the observation sheets that we went through. So here's your self scores, and so you can kind of look at how we combine there. We were within a point on all of them, so I feel like your understanding of the.
Thanks.
You're welcome. I think your understanding of the rubric is pretty solid. We're consistent on this, and I like to see that, so that you're self-evaluating. And then, when you're SLO, this would tie right back into that reflection as well. And so here's your reinforcement that we've already talked about, and your objective in questioning, to use a variety of questions to promote deeper thinking.
Right.
Went through there. So, any questions on that?
No.
All right, good. I'll get you a copy of it, and I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your time and feedback. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.